The wind stirred the sagebrush, whistling low across the empty plains. Morning light crept slowly over the horizon, casting long shadows over the dusty path that wound its way toward the town of Gallows Reach, a town that hadn't seen peace in over a decade. She rode alone. The woman's name was Clara Boone. Folks in the territory knew her by reputation more than by sight. A former tracker turned rancher, Clara had long since left behind the blood and bounty of her past. But something about that morning had pulled her out of bed before sunrise. A chill in her bones, an unease in the air, like the land itself was, holding its breath. Her horse, a weathered roan mare named Mercy, slowed as Clara spotted something ahead, just off the trail. Buzzards circled above, but not too low. Not yet. She dismounted, hand resting near the revolver at her hip. The man was lying face down in the dirt, barely visible beneath a mess of torn cloth and dried blood. The arrow in his back had broken at the shaft but still jutted out, crude and splintered. His badge caught the morning light, tarnished silver, still pinned to his chest. Clara's eyes narrowed. "Marshal," she muttered. He stirred, groaning faintly. Clara knelt beside him and turned him gently. He was young, maybe with a face made older by pain and dust. The wound was bad, but the fact he was breathing meant he hadn't bled out yet. "Don't move," she said firmly, tearing a strip from her sleeve and pressing it against the worst of the bleeding. "You're lucky I came along." His cracked lips parted. "Names. Elias Greinier. They're Cumin." Clara's eyes flicked to the horizon. "Who? Bounty hunters? 3 of them. Rode me down outside Dry Creek. Thought I was someone else, then figured I was worth more dead than alive." He coughed, grimacing. "Didn't check to see if they finished the job." Clara worked quickly, snapping the shaft and binding him as best she could. She'd seen wounds like this before, arrowheads laced with rust or worse. If he made it through the day, he'd be lucky to keep the arm, let alone ride again. "You, Law?" she asked, checking his sidearm and laying it within reach. "Used to be. Took the star back up when things went bad in Gallows Reach. Figured someone had to stand up." Clara nodded slowly. She'd heard about Gallows Reach burned courthouses, disappearances, whole families vanishing overnight. The kind of place where justice got buried faster than the dead. "You picked the wrong town," she said. Elias gave a tired laugh that turned into a wheeze. "Ain't that the truth?" The sound of hooves broke the quiet. Clara's head snapped toward the trail. 3 riders, dark silhouettes against the morning sun, moving slow but steady, confident, like men who had nothing to fear. The bounty hunters had arrived. She drew her rifle from the saddle and checked the chamber. 5 rounds. Enough for a warning. Maybe more, if it came to it. "You up to running?" she asked Elias. He shook his head, eyes glassy. "Don't waste time on me." Clara didn't answer. She slung the rifle, lifted Elias with a grunt, and half-dragged, half-carried him to a rocky outcrop 10 yards off the trail. There was some cover there, boulders, scrub, the barest hint of a defensible position. She laid him down, propped him against a stone, and handed him his revolver. "They come for you, you shoot to kill," she said. "And you?" he asked. "I ain't letting them take you," she replied. The riders closed in. No words. No greeting, just the heavy thump of hooves and the promise of violence. Clara stood between them and the Marshal, heart steady, rifle raised. The wind picked up again. The sun had barely risen, and already, the day smelled like blood. The 3 riders fanned out as they drew closer, an old tactic Clara knew too well. Don't give the enemy one target. Make 'em guess who'll shoot first. Clara didn't flinch. She stood tall between the rock outcrop and the open trail, her rifle aimed low but ready. Her hat brim shadowed her face, her jaw set like granite. The lead rider brought his horse to a slow stop about 20 feet away. He was lean, wolf-eyed, with a weathered face that looked more bone than skin. His duster was coated in trail dust, and the rifle strapped across his back had seen more death than daylight. "You got something that don't belong to you," he said. Clara didn't lower the gun. "You talkin' about the half-dead man, bleeding behind me?" A chuckle came from the second rider, a burly man with scars down his cheek like claw marks. The third, a wiry youth with nervous eyes, didn't laugh, just watched her with the skittish energy of someone who'd shoot first and regret it later. The lead man leaned forward in the saddle. "Marshal Elias Granger, wanted for dereliction, insubordination, and obstruction of frontier law. Price on his heads posted in 3 territories. Now, I ain't got a quarrel with you, ma'am, but that bounty's ours." Clara squinted. You got paperwork. He smirked. What do you think? I think if he was really wanted in 3 territories, he wouldn't be wearing a Marshal's star and dying in the dirt from an arrow in the back. Stars don't mean much these days. Clara gave a slow nod. Neither do words from the mouths of liars. The lead rider's hand twitched near his belt. Clara caught it, saw the glint in his eyes. You draw, she said coldly, and I'll drop you before your boot hits the ground. For a heartbeat, the world froze. The wind stilled. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Then the second rider, the one with the scars, moved fast. His hand reached for the shotgun slung over his saddle, but Clara was faster. One shot cracked from her rifle. It echoed across the plains like thunder. The man dropped with a grunt, falling from his horse like a sack of wheat. Dust kicked up where he hit the ground, a clean red stain spreading through his coat. The nervous young one fumbled, drawing his pistol but failing to aim. Clara rolled to her left, ducking behind the rock and firing again. This shot grazed the youth's shoulder, sending him spinning in the saddle. He clung to the reins, screaming, blood dripping from his arm. The leader didn't move. Not yet. Clara crouched beside Elias. Still with me. He coughed, pale but alert. Don't let him flank us. She nodded. On it. The leader finally dismounted, slow and deliberate, hands raised. Let's talk, he called. You had your chance. I didn't draw, no, but you sent the others to do your dirty work. That makes you worse. He took a cautious step forward. Lady, I don't know who you are. Name's Clara Boone. That stopped him. The name rippled through the air like a gunshot. Even the injured younger man paused, his face draining of color. You're lying, the leader said, but he didn't sound sure. Clara stood tall again, rifle trained on his chest. You want to test that? He hesitated, then slowly backed toward his horse. This ain't over, he muttered. You ride away now, and maybe you live to say that again. He helped his bleeding partner into the saddle and mounted up. With one last look, full of frustration and calculation, the 2 remaining bounty hunters turned and rode off into the rising sun, leaving their fallen behind. Clara waited until they were out of sight, then finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Elias groaned. You really Clara Boone? I am. He gave a pained smile. Remind me not to get on your bad side. She knelt beside him again, checking the bindings. We need to move. They'll circle back once they realize I'm not bluffing. You think they'll come back for the body? No, she said. They'll come back for revenge. She looked at the horizon. Gallows Reach lay east 3 days' ride if they kept slow and hidden. Think you can sit a saddle? He nodded. Barely. Clara stood and looked toward the trail. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sun climbed higher as Clara and Elias pressed on, the wounded Marshal leaning heavily on her as they rode. Every creak of the saddle and snap of a twig set Clara's nerves on edge. The land around them was unforgiving, dry, cracked earth, stretching out like a cracked canvas, broken only by the occasional twisted tree or scrubby bush. Gallows Reach was not far now, but Clara knew the town had changed since she last passed through. The kind of place where people whispered instead of spoke, where eyes darted and hands stayed close to guns. A town that had gone dark in more ways than one. Why'd you take the job again? Clara asked, breaking the silence. Elias winced but met her gaze, because no one else would. Corruption's rotted the county from the inside out. The old Marshal was bought and paid for, or worse. I figured if I didn't stand, who would? Clara nodded slowly. That's a dangerous road. Yeah, he said, breathing hard. But sometimes you gotta walk it anyway. They passed an abandoned homestead, its roof caved and windows shattered like broken teeth. Clara thought about the families that used to live here, gone or hiding. Maybe both. A hawk screeched overhead, circling in wide loops as if scouting the terrain. Clara tightened her grip on the reins, muscles taut. Bounty hunters won't be the only problem waiting in Gallows Reach, she said quietly. Elias looked at her sharply. What do you mean? Clara hesitated. The town's run by a shadow councilman who answer to no law but their own. They control the sheriffs, the judges, even the preacher. Elias swallowed. Sounds like hell. It is. And they want you dead because you threaten everything they've built. The miles passed in silence after that, each one heavier than the last. Clara could feel Elias weakening with every heartbeat. As they crested a small hill, the town came into view, a cluster of dusty buildings, smokestacks belching faint gray smoke, and a main street littered with broken wagons and rusted barrels. Clara spotted figures moving in the shadows, watching them approach. "Welcome to Gallows Reach," she said grimly. The main street of Gallows Reach was a ghost of what it had once been. Boards hung loose on storefronts, windows were shuttered or shattered, and the air smelled of dust, sweat, and something darker - fear. Clara led Elias through the silence, eyes sharp for movement. The townsfolk peered from cracked doorways or behind curtains, their faces etched with suspicion. No one stepped forward to offer help. No one dared at the old saloon. Clara paused. The place looked deserted, but her instincts told her otherwise. "We need allies," she said. "People who haven't given up." Elias nodded, wincing as he settled deeper into the saddle. "Where? Old Tom. Runs the blacksmith shop and knows everyone who's anyone. If he's still alive, he's our best shot." The blacksmith's forge was a ramshackle building on the edge of town, smoke curling faintly from its chimney. Inside, the heat was fierce, and the air smelled of sweat and metal. Old Tom looked up from his hammering, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too many winters. His gaze sharpened when he saw Clara and Elias. "Clara Boone," he said gruffly, "didn't expect to see you here. We need help." Elias was attacked by bounty hunters wanted dead or alive. The Shadow Council's tightening its grip. Tom's face darkened. "They've been pushing folks around for months. The sheriff's hands are tied. You're asking for a fight. We're ready for it," Clara said. Tom nodded slowly. "I'll gather what I can. But be warned, this town's buried under layers of fear and silence. Getting them to rise won't be easy." As they left the forge, Clara felt the weight of the coming storm. The dawn had brought wounds and enemies, but now the fight for Gallows Reach itself was beginning. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over Gallows Reach. Clara, Elias, and old Tom gathered in a back room of the blacksmith shop, joined by a handful of townfolk, miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers who still dared to hope for change. Plans were whispered in hushed tones, eyes flickering toward the windows where darkness crept closer by the minute. "They control the sheriff," old Tom warned. "If he finds out we're organizing, he'll come down hard." Clara met the group's gaze. "Then we need to act before they do." Tonight, Elias winced but stood, determination burning in his eyes despite the arrow in his back. This town deserves justice. As night fell, the group dispersed, each taking up positions across town. Clara and Elias stayed close, alert to every sound. A sudden shout pierced the quiet. The sheriff's posse was coming. Clara pulled Elias behind a stack of crates as men with rifles stormed the street, faces masked in shadows. "Scatter!" the sheriff barked. "No more hiding." Gunfire erupted. Clara's rifle cracked through the night air as she fired from cover. Elias, grimacing with pain, took aim with his revolver, steady despite his injury. The battle for Gallows Reach had begun. The night was thick with tension, as voices rose in hurried whispers and hurried footsteps echoed through the narrow streets. Clara stayed close to Elias, who was still weak but determined, leaning on her for support. The sheriff's men moved, like shadows, their presence a dark cloud over the town. They were here to break the fragile hope that Clara and the others had kindled. Out of the corner of her eye, Clara noticed someone slipping away from the small group they had man who had promised to stand with them but now seemed to choose a different path. A sinking feeling filled Clara's chest. She whispered, "Not all who say they're with us can be trusted." Without hesitation, she gestured for Elias to stay back and followed the man toward the saloon. Inside, the dim glow of lanterns cast long shadows. Clara's footsteps were silent as she moved through the room, but the man was gone. Suddenly, a firm hand touched her shoulder. She turned to face the sheriff, whose cold eyes held more questions than answers. "Clara Boone," he said quietly, "you're stirring up more trouble than this town can handle." Elias appeared in the doorway, steady despite his injury. The sheriff sighed, lowering his hand. "This town's caught between what's right and what's safe. Which side will you choose?" Clara met his gaze, unwavering. The night was far from over, and the true battle for Gallows Reach had only just begun. The first light of dawn broke over Gallows Reach, painting the town in soft gold. Clara stood on the ridge overlooking the main street, the quiet before the storm settling heavy in the air. Elias, still bruised but resolute, sat astride his horse beside her. The night's betrayal had shaken them, but it also ignited something fiercer, a determination to reclaim their town. Old Tom and the few brave souls who remained rallied behind them, ready to face whatever the Shadow Council would send next as townsfolk peeked from behind shuttered windows. Whispers of hope stirred like the morning breeze. Clara looked to Elias. "This ends today." With steady hands, Elias adjusted his star. For justice, for gallows reach. Together, they rode into town. The showdown was not one of guns or bloodshed, but of courage and truth. Faced with the undeniable will of the people and the unyielding stand of Clara and Elias, the Shadow Council's grip began to unravel. By midday, the streets buzzed with life again, with promises of a new dawn not just in the sky, but in the hearts of those who called Gallows Reach home. Clara and Elias knew their fight was just beginning. But for the first time in a long while, justice had a chance to breathe.